Welcome back to the Woodgrafter. Today we're having a look at the Miter Express from Incra. That sounds good. Stick around. As you know, I recently bought the Dewalt table saw and I really like it. It's a great device. I did a full review here if you're interested. But it's got some downsides and it's got some challenges that I'm hoping to fix with the inclusion of the Incra Miter Express. So in today's video, we're going to have a look at the use case to see why I wanted to invest. We're going to see what you get in the kit for your money, and more importantly, what you don't get in the kit that you need to buy separately. We'll then assemble this thing, we'll then calibrate it, and then we'll put it through its paces. The video is timestamped, and if you go down to the description, you can quickly jump to the part of the video you want to see, should for some wacky reason you not want to stay with me for the next half hour. So with that said, what problem am I trying to solve by including this system? Here's my table saw, sits very happily on there in my bench, and the next project on my list is to build a cabinet for this so it works really well in my workshop. Now in terms of the rip cut capability of this, I absolutely love it. The fence is perfect, it does a great job. It's as parallel as you like to the blade, super accurate, super adjustable, and I get exactly what I need. But the crosscut capacity on this is nowhere near where I need it to be. Now the first problem I've got is the lead-in distance for those crosscuts, the distance from the cutting part of the blade to this surface here, so the amount supported. With no miter gauge fitted, I'm coming in at around about 155 millimeters. And when you come along and you fit a suitable miter gauge into that, then that's reduced even further, allowing for the support of the miter gauge. So problem number one is I want to increase the capacity here of the lead-in on that cut. Now number two, the miter gauge that came with this isn't very good. I mean, it's going to be okay for cutting approximate angles on a job site, but it's not really what I want to use when I'm making precision cut. So I wanted to increase the quality of the miter gauge to give me more accuracy and repeatability on my cuts. Now problem number three is that the tops on a job site saw don't tend to be perfectly flat. I'm quite lucky because mine is reasonably flat, but I've had lots of reports from people saying, hey, mine's dipping down in the middle here. Now the problem with having the dip in the table, of course, is that your wood's not supported throughout the cut. So as it starts to come into the blade, the wood will vibrate, and that vibration will affect the quality of the cut. Or if you push your wood down, then it will deform to the shape of the table, and as you go across the cut, you won't get square cuts on the table. So that's not good enough for the precision that I need. Now I know at this point everybody's screaming at the screen saying, Andy, just make a crosscut sled. And I did make a crosscut sled, and yes, that works incredibly well. And here's the beast that I made. Now the problem I've got, of course, is the weight of the sled starts to tip. So I usually end up putting a roller clamp here to support this coming out of the cut. Now the other observation about the sled that I made is this edge here is perfectly 90 degrees to the blade, and that's great if I want to do a 90-degree cut. If I want to vary that cut, then I've got problems. I need to do a different type of sled or put some sort of additional sacrificial fence on here to allow for the angle, etc. So yes, I solved the leading problem to a point, so long as I've got some support underneath the sled. I solved the flat surface problem with this perfectly, and I solve 90-degree accurate cuts, but I don't solve the adjustability issue that I want. And also this is quite big and cumbersome, and I've only got a small shop, and storing this for the odd time that I need it isn't something I wanted to do. So that's pretty much the problems I'm trying to solve. Improve supported lead-in on the crosscut, the adjustability you get with a quality miter gauge so I can do angles, a flat surface so all my cuts come out perfectly clean, crisp, and more importantly, exactly the angle I want them to come in at. That's what I'm looking to solve with this. So with that said, let's have a look at what we get in the kit, and more importantly, what we don't get in the kit to actually make the system work. When you buy the Miter Express, you get this box. You do not get the fence, you do not get a miter gauge, and you do not get a flip stop. And we'll look at the prices of all these and how the price quickly builds up later on in the video. And the idea behind this sled is you're adding your own fence and miter gauge to it. Now that's great if you have a miter gauge, and I've built up my miter gauge over time. I bought the miter gauge to use on my bandsaw. I then added the fence to my miter gauge system to use on my router table, and more recently I bought the flip stop as well. So I built mine up over time, and that's probably familiar for a lot of people. You add to your system. So I had some of this kit anyway, But if you don't have that, you've got to buy it. Otherwise, this is nothing more than a very, very shiny piece of wood. Expensive shiny piece of wood. Bear that in mind. So opening the box in true Incra style, everything is incredibly well packaged. We obviously get the instructions that we're going to use to build this thing. We get some self-adhesive PTFE tape that is going to be used to reduce the friction between the actual system and the table saw. We get a number of aluminium extrusions or highly milled aluminium, all in this gorgeous Incra gold colour that is their signature. We get a single build it type clamp for holding material down. We get a bag of bits and bobs and some associated Allen keys. And then we get some of these nice red MDF panels, which obviously makes the sled itself. In addition, you're going to want some sort of miter gauge. This is the Incra V120 miter gauge. You're going to want some sort of fence. This is the 18-inch telescopic flip stop fence, again from Incra. And you're probably going to want some sort of stop, and this is the Incra flip shop stop. Okay, so the next job is let's build this thing. So we'll follow the instructions step by step and see how complicated it is. Now it's important that when you build this, that you build it on the table saw you're going to actually use it on, because you tune it to work on the particular saw that you've got. The first thing you want to do is to work out whether you're going to use your left hand miter or your right hand miter. Now that's dependent on how your blade tips. So you can see that my blade tips over to the left. So the instructions say, if your blade tips to the right, you want the miter sled to the left of the blade, which is this side. If your blade tilts left, which mine does, then you want the sled on the right side of the blade, this side. Now it says typically, and I guess there are some use cases where you may not want to follow that advice, but I'm going to follow the advice. My blade's tipping over to the left, so I'm going to build mine onto the right hand slot. That's the first thing that you establish. You then want to find the utility plate, which is this nice big beast here, and if you look inside, there's a little label, caution, arrows must point towards the blade. So I know I'm using the right hand slot because my blade sits to the left. There's a little T-slot here that slots into your T-slot channel, and as long as those arrows are pointing towards the blades, I'm in good shape. There's two diagrams, there's 4A and there's 4B. This one is if you're assembling to the left hand side of the blade, 4B to the right hand side of the blade, and obviously I'm assembling to the right hand side of the blade, so I'm using panel 4B. And you just follow that diagram basically and put all the bits and bobs onto your table. And then this piece will rest on here, and this piece will rest on here, and those two pieces are joined together with this. And once you've got all that lined up, it's just a matter of screwing it all into place with the provided screws that come in pack C13. You get two sizes of screws in the bag. You get this long one here and the short one. It's a shorter one you need, and that's pretty obvious because there's lots of them. They're Phillips, so we need a Phillips screwdriver, and that's no harder than just lining those up. That was relatively painless, and that's all set up quite nicely. What I will say is everything is precision made in this, but then again, would you expect anything less? So it all locks in perfectly, no dramas, nothing's misaligned. Next step is you want to adjust the utility plate for smooth glide in the miter slot. Now there is a little bit of play in this, and what we're going to do is to tighten down these 1, 2, 3 Allen keys here. What they do is they're just going to put some pressure. This is a tapered slot here on the back, and these are obviously tapered nuts. So by tightening that up, you're just going to push out ever so slightly. Oh, sorry, there's 4 of them, not 3. Just going to push out that bottom rail. And obviously what you want to do is to adjust that so this slides smoothly, but there's no play. Give everything a quarter of a turn for no apparent reason, just it feels like a good idea. See how that feels. Still a bit of play, but it's still sliding very smoothly, so I'll give it another quarter of a turn. Now I've no play anymore, but it doesn't slide very well, so I'm going to back it off an 1/8 of a turn. And I just want that balance between sliding smoothly and not moving laterally, if that makes sense. Now I have had some people report to me that the channels on the Dewalt aren't perfectly parallel, they're not linear, so you may have to fettle around a little bit to get this going. And I think that's going to be the case on this one, because this is now binding really tightly here, but when I move it down, it's actually sliding pretty smoothly there. And I've not got any lateral play in it. And I can see I'm rubbing about here, and I can see I'm rubbing about here as well. So I think it's slightly tight here and here. Just lightly clean up those two areas. Obviously, if you've got a high quality table saw, you don't need to do that. And that's what I'm looking for, that smooth travel across the table saw, but no lateral movement. So that's bang on. So just watch out for that. Don't just go mad tightening these down. Think about what you're doing. It could well be the channel, it was in my case here, that has some binding inside it. Good. So once you've got that done, the next step is we want to cut off this side of the panel. This is known as a drop panel. So you can see my cut lines here. So I'm going to trim this down. And that's why I was saying before, build this on the table saw you're going to use it on, for obvious reasons. So I'm just going to raise up the blade, and I want to check that my blade is actually 90 degrees. So I'm just going to use my Incra square. So that is bang on 90 degrees, but just check that. It's always worth checking. Another thing I like about the Dewalt with the aftermarket blade I put on there, look how clean the cut is. That's gone through Formica and obviously MDF, and there's zero chip out. Really, really nice. So the next thing that we need to be doing is dropping in the aluminium miter bar into the other slot. Make sure you've got the screws up. And you can see the way this works. We're going to tighten these two down. Those nuts are going to be pulled in. And once again, that's a taper profile in the back. And you can see it's just going to push these two sides out here. Now I'm fully expecting this channel on the Dewalt to have the same problems that this channel has and not be smooth all the way down. Same technique, I'm going to turn it a quarter of a turn and see how it looks. So once we've got that set up and fettled, we then attach the drop panel to the aluminium miter bar using 4 of the Phillips flathead screws, and they were in the same bag that we used here in step 2A, so they were in bag C13. You'll see here that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of holes, 1, 2, 3 deep, and they correspond to these threaded holes here. You want to choose the set that is going to allow this piece here to hang over the blade. That makes sense, because you're going to cut this off and that's going to give you the panel either side of your blade. So any of these will do, but I want to get quite a good reference surface, so I'm going to choose these and then I'll slice this part of the blade off. Now once you've got that, you want to make sure that this still has no lateral movement inside it and it still slides. So you can see mine's gone a little bit tight now as I've tightened those bolts down, but cleverly these large holes, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, give you access to those screws that we were just adjusting before. So I can now just back this off a little bit. Okay, good. So that's now where I want it. So you can sort of kind of see how this works now. That's given me a zero clearance cut between those two red panels, so my stock is going to be supported. And obviously once I've got my miter gauge on, I can just go ahead and make my cuts quite happily. So that's already really quite neat, I think. The channels here inside the Dewalt are actually T-channels, so there's a lip at the top, and that's the thing that's going to allow this to be self-supporting inside that channel. So I won't need this fence here, and it gives me that capacity when I pull it back. This is still supported in that T-slot, giving me that long lead-in I'm looking for. Well, that's the theory. You're going to find those in bag C14, there they are. And what I want to do is just overhang the rail a little bit here. You're going to put these with the proud part up. If you look there, it's flat on one side, and it's got this proud piece on the other. And you're looking for the dome head Phillips screws. And that locks that nicely into the channel to give it some support, giving me that long lead-in. And you put one on the back as well for similar reasons. Which means, in theory, I no longer need this fence here. Now that works quite well. So I've got supports here on the fence, so this is not going to tip. I can line my stock up, the fence is not going to be in the way. And then when I'm ready to cut, bit of pressure here. The things we've just adjusted, line it up square to the blade, and I go ahead and make my cut nice and smooth and safely. Lovely. So my work is supported all the time, and that gives me that flat surface and that leading space we were looking for. You're going to apply these strips to this panel, and this panel, not this panel. You're trying to just raise this up a little bit from the panel and reduce the friction between this panel and your table saw. Now you want to be able to put these strips where it contacts the table. So in my case, about the center of this panel, and just here, just clearing this aluminium strip at this panel to rest on that part of the table. In my situation, I don't have any table here if I'm resting it on this fence or if it's just overhanging. But I know that when I build the cabinet's going to extend out quite a long way here. So this will be supported. So I'm also going to put one just on the inside here for future use. So with all that in your mind, I'm going to tip this over, just line up against the blade so I know where it is. And now I can see I'm going to put one down here, and probably one down here. Okay, now that slides as free as you like with no lateral movement inside it, and this is ever so slightly above this board here, which makes perfect sense. So we now move to the operation section. It says the first thing you need to do is to position and lock the drop panel. So all that work we did making that move nice and smoothly is now going to get undone. What you want to do is to lock this into place, and it's saying it wants the leading edge here to be about 2 to 3 inches. So what's that, about 50 to 75 mil? So it makes sense to support that at the back there. So we'll do this one about here. I think that's going to be about 75 mil, so that's within tolerance. And then you lock these down. So you now need to put your mitre gauge on. Now obviously this is the Incra V120 mitre gauge, and that's going to sit into this nice wide slot here. Now interestingly, if you look at the profile here of this, it's got these T-pieces at the bottom that were obviously to engage with that slot. This doesn't allow for T-pieces, so although it says it works with any gauge, it won't actually work with the one that came with the saw. So if you're looking to buy this and use it with a T gauge, it's not going to fit for you. There's no way that's going to go in. And similarly, I've been using my mitre with this T-slot that came with it, and even though it's Incra, that won't fit either. So I'm going to drop this off, and now that drops nicely into there. But beware of that. This channel is not going to work if you've got a mitre that's got the T-slot on it. Interesting. Now if you want to make smaller cuts, obviously you position this further on here, so you're maximising the support of the stock across your sled. But you can also move this all the way back, and one of the things that we were looking for, that sort of configuration, which now gives me a lot of lead in here on this sled, which is awesome. Now in the bag C14, which is where we got the T-nuts from, there's these three things as well. These are known as cam screws. And you can see that the head is slightly offset from centre from the screw itself. That wants to fit in to the appropriate holes here on your system. So if I'm going to lock this in at this point, it makes sense I just screw these in there. So we'll use this one, and this one. So I'm just going to drop this out of the way a second, just so I can insert those. Now actually thinking this through, what I like about this, my mitre gauge as well has this 1, 2, 3 cam system, and they are tuned to work in the mitre slot that I've got on my router table. And I was a bit concerned that if I were to use these same cams to tighten this into here, it's no longer tuned for my router table. But I don't need to touch those at all, because this slot comes with its own cams. And that's simply a matter of turning those around until it tightens into the bar, like so, and that is now fixed. And I've not had to adjust those cams that are set for my router table. So happy days with that design. Love that design. Excellent. Now you'll notice here we've got this other channel that we've not used yet, and that's for the clamp. You get 4 parts in your clamp kit. You get the long bolt, the beautiful red clamp itself, nice plastic knob, a barrel with a thread in it, and a washer. Put the barrel into the slot. It just sort of goes into that hole there. Drop your screw or your bolt into the T-slot there. Drop your clamp on there. Drop your washer on there. And put your head on. Now at this point you're pretty much ready to go. You can take your stock, you can line your cut up with the edge of this, because you know that's where it's going to cut to. Bring your clamp in, clamp your workpiece down, and you make your cut. Nice and safe and sound, beautiful cut that just feels like it's going to be so accurate in what we're trying to achieve. happy days. Obviously it's a miter gauge, so if I wanted to make a 45-degree cut, I can lock it into 45, lock it down, and line up my cut, clamp my stock against the fence and the table, and now I'm making 45-degree cuts, or any of the cut angles that miter gauge allows me to make. So super easy, super versatile, super impressed. Now obviously this is pretty pointless if it's not square, so I'm just going to come in with my precision triangle and rest it against the miter fence and the blade, and would you believe that is perfectly square. And we'll look at the flip stop now. This is a flip stop, it comes ready assembled. You've got a couple of white knobs here that you loosen off, and then that can just slot anywhere on there. Lock it into the position you want, lock it down, and then you can use this here to give you that repeatable stop. This will actually work in a variety of ways. If you were to take out that bar completely, you've now got two flip stops, so that would then give you one position and a second position if you wanted. What I think is more useful to us is the ability to be able to calibrate this to our fence. Let me show you. Now you can see on the top here there's these two nuts, and that actually allows this red piece to slide backwards and forwards in the gold piece that we just attached to the fence. Loosen those off and that can now slide. And what I can do, I can use that and this stop here to adjust this to calibrate the fence. So I'm going to loosen this off and I'm going to bring this up to the very end, which we know would be a zero cut. And then I'm going to raise the blade. Now I'm going to set this little silver bar just so it's slightly proud, not too much, just slightly proud of that forward facing stop, and I'll tighten the back one down as well, so that's nice and secure. Loosen those two things off, getting my stop out of the way. I'm just going to bring this bar in now so it touches the widest part of the cut, which is going to be that tooth there, and I'm going to lock this into position. 1, 2, and then I'm going to bring in this piece, this screw here, until it pushes against that and lock that into position. And I've now calibrated my fence to the blade. And you can just see that silver banging the blade there, and I've got this end here, the reference point here, set to 0 on that scale. So what that means, I can now set this to a distance. So this is calibrated in centimeters, so I can set my reference edge here onto the 20 centimeters, 200 millimeters mark there, and tighten that down. And now in theory the distance from the cutting edge here to this silver should be 20 centimeters or 200 millimeters, and surprisingly enough it is. So there you go, we've now got the miter fence set onto the table, all constructed, all the accessories in place. Took about 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon, which is a nice time to do this sort of thing when you've got no pressure on, and I'm pleased with it, and I think it solved all the problems I was looking to solve. Let's just make a couple of cuts. It's churlish not to get to this point. We'll just take some scrap stock and I'll probably make some 45-degree cuts, and just let's see whether we get something that looks nice and rectangular and square. Let's have a look at that. I'll just chop this stock up into something that's useful for us. I've no idea what size that was, so we'll just set the stop block to whatever size that was. And then we should be able to make 4 pieces of that size. So we've got 4 pieces of stock, all the same size now. That works reasonably well, I think. Set this to 45. Now, I've not got a lot of reference surface here, and the good thing about the clamp is that takes that problem away from me. I can bring this in at a nice angle, make sure that's nicely against the fence, and lock that into place. That should give me a rather elegant frame with nice mitered corners. What do you think? Not too bad, I don't think. Everything's come out the same length, obviously, or else it wouldn't be square. The joints are all beautifully mitered. There's zero tear out on those cuts, and this is a soft pine which is prone to tear out. Happy days, not too bad at all, pleased with that. So there you go, I think that's completely transformed the table. It's really increased the capacity of cut here, and if I move this miter back, I've got that sort of kind of distance as opposed to that distance before. Beautiful flat reference surface now, no bows, no tips inside that. I've got the versatility of making those angle cuts that we saw, and we saw in that quick demo, even though I wasn't really thinking about it, just rushed it, how well and precise that came out. I've got the additional safety of the clamps, so my hands are nowhere near the cutting line, and actually when I use it I'm standing here, so I'm outside any kickback line as well, so it changes the way you use it. You're no longer in the firing line for kickback and bits of stock flying out. I think with this surface being slightly lower than this surface, additional safety feature as well. We've got the versatility of the flip stop, and overall it works very well. Happy days. So there you have it, that's the Incra Miter Express, built, fitted, calibrated and put onto my Dewalt table saw. A couple of hours on a Sunday afternoon, nice way to spend the day, and it solved all those problems I set out to solve, so I'm hugely pleased with that. Just one thing to note, especially if you like my workshop, completely metric workshop, all the screws and the fixings on these, all the Allen keys, they're actually Imperial, so it does come with the Allen key. Be careful you don't lose it. I have no Imperial Allen keys in my workshop apart from the ones that come with the Incra system, and I did lose one once and I could no longer adjust these screws on my miter fence. So look after these or buy yourself a set of Imperial tools. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, because this is not a cheap proposition. It's done everything I wanted it to do. It's small, it's compact, that's easily going to store on my wall out of the way until I need it. It's precise, it's safe, it's done everything that I wanted it to do, but at a price point. The Incra Miter Gauge Express, remember that didn't include the stop, didn't include the miter, didn't include the fence, but everything else was there. £179.95. £179.95. The miter gauge that I've got here, which is the V120, is £98.95. The fence I have here, which is the 18 to 31 inch telescopic fence, is £49.96. The flip stop, this piece here, is £46.96. If you add all that together, this kit, to solve my problems, has cost £373.82, and that's in August of 2000, sorry, that's in September of 2021. I already had the gauge, I already had the fence, I'd built it up over time, I added this, and I've got no regrets, because that's going to transform the way I use my table saw. There you go, I can think of nothing else to tell you about the Incra Express. I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you next time on the Woodgrafter. Look after yourselves, stay safe, take care.